Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing a Top 5 Wednesday video. Top 5 Wednesday is a Goodreads group originally created by Lainey from Ginger Reads Lainey, but currently moderated by Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. I'll link the group below so you can go find it. Basically, every week there's a topic, and you can give your top 5 picks for that topic on whatever your recommending platform on the internet is. So today's topic is favorites you want to revisit. And this is a topic I am revisiting because like a year and a half ago, I did a whole video that was, I think, a Top 5 Wednesday of books you want to reread. And since then, I've done absolutely miserably at actually rereading any of those books. I think I have reread one of them. So yoo-hoo-hoo, one down, 4 to go. But revisiting this topic, I looked back at that list and said, you know, maybe some of these I'm still super interested in them. Maybe some of them they're not top priority for me to reread anymore. I have compiled a list for this video where everything on it that I have rated, that I have read since I started rating books on Goodreads, got a 5-star rating for me. So these are all really favorites I want to reread. And then the one thing that isn't something I've rated before is something I have not read since I was a child. But I'm going to start by talking about the 2 that were in the previous video, one of which has made it onto several TBRs for me since then, several monthly TBRs, and I've never actually ended up rereading it. And that's Chalice by McKinley. This is still the only 5-star McKinley book that I have never reread. And I'm thinking about this just now because just last night I finished reading The Changeling Sea by Patricia A. McKillop. And I was remembering that I had sort of started reading McKillop after reading this book because I sort of wanted more like this, and I found that recommendation somewhere. And reading The Changeling Sea gave me some of the same feels that I remember getting when I read this book, that sort of like gentle, small town magical fantasy vibe. And that's just like some of my ultimate comfort reading, so I still desperately want to reread this book sometime very, very soon, please. Another really beautifully written, elegant fantasy that I still want to revisit that I had in that first video is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, which is an absolute classic of the genre. There are bits of this book that are so beautiful, they've absolutely stuck with me. I have seen the movie since reading this book, but I do still want to reread the book. And it's one of those books that, like, every time I see anyone talking about it on the internet, it makes me want to reread it. Next, I have a couple of books that were maybe more recent-ish reads for me when I made that first video way back when. And so I wasn't yet thinking about rereading them, but they're getting closer to the point where I want to reread them now. The first is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, which I read, I think, in the year before I joined BookTube. This is a very character-driven fantasy book that just has so many very emotionally moving scenes in it that I still think about, that make me want to pick it up off the shelf and like, oh, what if I were to just reread that scene? And that is actually how I ended up rereading books when I was a kid. All of the time, I would pick a book off my shelf and just say, I'm just gonna reread my 3 favorite scenes in this book. And before I knew it, I was like, oh, I think I'm just going to remind myself how this book starts and read like the first chapter. And before I knew it, I'd be up all night on a school night rereading the book. So someday I think that's going to happen to me with this book. I think my adult grown-up restraint is not going to hold out eternally with regards to this one. The third book on this list is the first in a duology, and I do want to reread both books. These are the Orphan's Tales books by Catherynne and Valente, In the Night Garden and In the Cities of Coin and Spice. These were the first books I ever read by her, and I was just blown away by them. I would like to go back and revisit them now that I know more about, you know, the scope of her writing. These are dense, intense fairy tale folklore, mythology, stories within stories. And since I've read these, I've sort of come across some of the more obscure fairy tales and myths and such that I now see must have influenced some of the stories. in this duology, and so I would like to reread them also with a little bit more of an eye towards what some of the sources were and what sort of fairy tale tropes and story elements are being used and repurposed in this duology. I would feel super guilty right now going back and rereading these though, just because there is still so much of Valente's backlist that I still haven't gotten to. Like, I'm not sure I can let myself take the time to reread these until I have read Deathless and the fifth Fairyland book. Those just have to happen first. And then the last book that I have on this list is the one that I have not read since I was a child, and it's actually 2 books, but I have them in a bind-up, and this is going to be a reread in a sort of different format from how I originally read them, because I have the Annotated Alice, the 150th Anniversary Deluxe Edition of the Annotated Alice, which combines Alice's adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Now, when I was a kid, I was familiar with both the Disney animated film, which I think I was closer to. I watched it more times than I'd read the books, but also I was familiar with both of the books. I had read them. I knew which parts of the books had made it into the movie and which parts had not. I have not come back to this source material since I have become an adult, and in recent years I have become very, very interested in the history of the fantasy genre. So this is a definite reread that needs to happen for me, and I want to reread it in this deluxe annotated edition because my interest in this now is more scholarly. I will say, in terms of revisiting favorites, like outside the book format, the animated Disney film is a favorite that I have revisited many times as an adult, and I find it to be completely worth the rewatch every time because there is so much, like, genius in that film. Practically every frame has something brilliant in it. The humor is funnier every time I watch it. But now that I am really, really interested in the history of fantasy, this is just something that needs to happen. In terms of, like, the children's portal fantasy classics that I was introduced to as a kid, like Narnia, I was never really all that into. I only read a few of the books. The Wizard of Oz, which I'm planning on rereading this week for the Booktubeathon, was also one that I was never totally all that into. I know I saw adaptations of both of those. It was Wonderland for me that was the portal fantasy that hooked me as a kid. So these are 5 favorites that I'm thinking right now I want to reread. We'll see in a year and a half from now if I've read maybe like one of these. Chalice is definitely a very high priority. The others, we'll see. I think the Annotated Alice is another very high priority after Chalice. But anyhow, have you read or reread any of these? Do you have some favorite books that you are planning to reread or that you want to reread, but that you don't think you're going to have time for anytime soon? Because some of these definitely fall into that category for me. Let me know how you're doing. Anyhow, I hope you have a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.